dust clung to the air above Fort Ridgefield, settling into uniforms, boots, and the edges of weathered maps. The wind flicked fine sand against plywood walls, while a diesel generator rattled quietly under the briefing table. The SEAL platoon stood packed together, the small room filled with gear, weapons, and a restless edge. Staff Sergeant Ava Sterling lingered just behind them, rifle case leaning against her leg, silent as always. She hadn't spoken since the explosion that destroyed her voice, but her eyes missed nothing. Lieutenant Daniel Cross tapped the ridgeline on the map, referring to her as the attachment, without even turning her way. Petty Officer Ryan Duke smirked and whispered to the guy next to him that she was nothing but decoration, earning a soft laugh. Ava didn't react. She stepped forward and traced a danger point on the map with one finger, but Cross brushed her hand aside like she wasn't even there. Quiet people often spot trouble long before anyone else does. Before we jump in, don't forget to subscribe to Major Tom's Tales so you never miss these real stories of bravery. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Ava moved around the compound the same way she moved through life. Quiet, efficient, unseen, until precision became necessary. She was in her early 30s, but her posture carried years of deployments and long nights behind a scope while everyone else slept. She'd been attached to the SEAL team as Overwatch support, and though the orders were clear, the team wasn't used to someone like her. They thrived on loud confidence and hard edges, and Ava brought none of that. She stood small among them, a scarf always wrapped around her throat like a warning no one understood. Her silence mistaken for fear. She grew up far from deserts and steel, in open farmland bordered by tall tree lines and harsh winter winds. Her grandfather kept an old wooden stock rifle in the barn, and she learned to hit fence posts farther than she could sprint. He would whisper wind hints into her ear, teaching her to sense direction instead of hear it. Long-distance shooting wasn't about noise. It was patience. Years later, when the Army placed her with an infantry battalion, the gun range felt familiar. She became the one they counted on when the line between safety and loss blurred. But one moment changed everything. A roadside bomb ripped through her convoy, fire and metal swallowing the air. Shrapnel tore open her throat. She woke days later unable to speak. Doctors doubted she'd survive at all. Her voice was gone forever. Most would have stepped away. Ava went straight back into training, learning to shoot again while the scar beneath her scarf pulsed with every breath. Silence didn't make her bitter. It made her exact. In her cargo pocket, she kept a small oil-marked notebook with worn pages and a stub of pencil tucked into the spiral. Her handwriting was precise and tight, filled with wind, corrections, temperature shifts, and drop calculations shaped like small equations. Her movements were always measured, slow, deliberate, controlled, the kind of discipline that comes from knowing every ounce of effort has a cost. When she checked her rifle, she did it wordlessly. When she wrote in her notebook, she leaned over the page with a calm, unreadable expression. First impressions made things tougher for her. During zeroing, Ryan Duke stood behind her, watching like he expected a mistake. He joked that maybe she couldn't talk because she never had anything intelligent to say. A couple of the guys laughed. Ava just cycled the bolt and waited for the reticle to settle. Her first round hit dead center. The next 5 stacked on top of it in one tight cluster. Duke's grin disappeared fast. Lieutenant Daniel Cross glanced at the grouping, shrugged, and acted like precision didn't matter if it came from someone who had no voice. He labeled her functionally limited in passing, as if those 2 words explained everything about her. But Chief Marcus Shaw watched differently. He didn't compliment her. He didn't defend her. He simply noticed things others ignored. When she eyed a ridgeline, his gaze followed. When she brushed grit off her lens to check elevation changes, he caught the careful rhythm in her hands. Shaw rarely spoke, but he wasn't blind to capability. Not fully. Small clues were impossible to ignore. Ava solved wind calculations in seconds. She drew slow sweeping angles with sharp precision. During movement drills, she didn't check the map. She redrew it from memory. Cross brushed off her observations, yet Evan Pierce, the medic, eventually copied her notes into his own book. Ava never pushed for respect. She didn't soften or try to win them over. Precision doesn't need to ask permission to exist. She ate alone, without resentment. She tuned her optics while others swapped stories about home. She communicated only through gestures and nods. Silence, not by choice, but by circumstance. And when they misunderstood her, she didn't waste energy correcting them. At dusk, she sat near the gravel barricades, cleaning her rifle as daylight drained away. The last bit of sunset touched her face, highlighting the scar hidden beneath her scarf. She ran a cloth along the bolt with calm repetition. Dust spiraled around her boots. Distant chatter rolled from the chow tent. Helicopters skimmed the horizon. Ava remained focused, steady, unaffected, never in a rush. Their approval meant nothing. She was preparing for the mission, not their acceptance. They moved out before dawn, icy air slicing through uniforms as breaths turned into pale clouds under their headlamps. The ridge towered ahead, layers of sharp stone and loose shale that shifted underfoot. Ava positioned herself just behind the lead element, rifle nestled quietly in her arms, as her eyes read the terrain long before anyone else sensed danger ahead. She halted, crouched low, and pointed toward a sloped bend on their left. That route tucked behind a natural rock spine, giving protection from two elevated angles of fire. Cross barely glanced, irritation flickering that someone without a voice dared to correct him. With a dismissive wave, he pushed everyone forward along his chosen route, steep, exposed, and too silent for comfort. Ava paused only a moment, raised her rifle, set her elevation without even checking the optic, and squeezed off 2 clean shots. Her shots hit just above the team, breaking stone loose into a spill of dust. The debris scattered like poured sand, covering the exact stretch where the lead man had been walking. Ryan Duke whipped around, swearing into the wind. "She nearly hit me," he yelled, and someone behind him snorted something about the mute sniper being the real danger. Daniel Cross spun, furious, shouting up toward her position that she was done firing unless he gave the order. Then the ridge erupted. Enemy fire cracked from the rocks, bullets slicing through the air where moments earlier the men had stood upright. The dust cloud she'd knocked loose bought them one precious second, just enough to drop low and scramble behind a narrow fold in the terrain. The first wave of rounds scraped the rock wall directly above them, an exact kill zone the enemy had already dialed in. No one admitted it out loud, but every pair of eyes shot toward where Ava Sterling was perched. Marcus Shaw called for suppressive fire. Duke clenched his jaw, knowing she had just saved them, yet refusing to swallow the truth. Cross barked orders, returning fire until the ambush thinned. When the ridge fell quiet again, dust still clung to gear and helmets like static. Ava slid down the slope without a word, warm casing still tucked into her pocket. She didn't look for thanks. She didn't even look up. She wiped the bolt clean, slow and steady. During the walk back, the jokes didn't stop, but their tone shifted. Softer. Uncertain. Someone muttered she must have guessed right. Another claimed it was a lucky ricochet that just happened to break the rocks at the perfect second. Admiring her shot meant admitting they had been wrong about her, and no one wanted to be the first. Would you apologize? Or laugh along just to keep your pride intact? Mission 2 came with heavier clouds. Intel warned of a stronger enemy presence, layers of overwatch positions, possible flanking routes. Ava studied the map, tapping a narrow rise near a drainage cut. She sketched wind arcs and ranges in her notebook and slid it toward Cross. He didn't even glance. "We're not changing course over someone's doodles," he muttered. They pushed on. Duke strutted ahead, rifle swinging lazily, muttering fresh jokes about the silent liability. Shaw walked close enough to hear, and though he didn't confront Duke, something sharpened in his eyes. Evan Pierce, trailing back, saw Ava's attention fix on the terrain across a wide gap, her gaze tightening. He murmured, "Problem?" She gave one simple nod. Pierce shifted behind her without a second thought, trusting that silent warning more than Cross's confidence. At a gravel chute near a narrow divide, Ava halted again. This time, she didn't fire. She scribbled numbers, circled them, then drew a line following the hill's natural contour. She handed the notebook to Pierce. His face changed the moment he processed the math. Wind speeds, angle changes, a full calculated threat picture. Not chance. Skill. Shaw noticed the medic's expression and silently moved closer. Minutes later, distant movement flickered on the far ridge. Shots rang out. Ava tapped Pierce's shoulder and pointed to a flat, unremarkable patch of shale. He adjusted his position, and bullets snapped through the space his head had occupied 1 second earlier. Not luck. Geometry. They returned to base, shaken but alive. Inside the dim map room, tension traveled through dropped gear and clenched shoulders. Ova stepped forward, picked up a dry erase marker, and drew 2 wide arcs over the ridge on the map, covering the exact fields of fire they had unknowingly crossed. She connected lines to the impact points. Silence thickened the room. Shaw studied the diagram. He didn't speak, didn't applaud. He just nodded once, slowly. It was the first moment anyone offered her real acknowledgement. Not for surviving, for knowing. Eyes started following her movements more carefully. Some still mocked, but others watched the direction she looked, the tilt of her shoulders, the places she paused. They didn't understand her language yet, but they finally realized she had one. Later, in the heat near the vehicles, Ava loosened her scarf to wipe dust from her neck. Pierce caught a glimpse of the scar, long, jagged, a permanent reminder of the voice she'd lost. She quickly fixed the fabric in place, not out of embarrassment but habit. Pierce didn't ask a thing. He just understood whoever stole her voice never took her strength. That evening, she set her notebook down on a bench when they called everyone for gear inventory. Evan Pierce picked it up, not to pry, just to keep it from getting covered in dust. But when he flipped open the front cover, he froze. The pages weren't casual scribbles. They were precise coordinates, accurate latitude and longitude, some double-marked, others circled. A few included estimated casualty counts beside them, written with cold accuracy rather than emotion. Her handwriting was steady, mathematical. These weren't practice notes. They were records of places where missions had gone wrong. He closed the notebook before she returned, though what he saw lingered heavily in his mind. Later, while she cleaned the threads on her barrel, her rifle case sat open on the table. Inside, pressed flat against the foam, was a worn cloth patch. Mountain Response Unit. The stitching looked aged, like it had been torn from a uniform long ago. Patches like that weren't issued freely. They were earned through bitter winters spent sleeping on ice, through nights waiting silently along white ridgelines, through rescues pulled off under fire while snow hid the blood. Ryan Duke noticed the patch too, but he just chuckled weakly and walked away, pretending it didn't shake his confidence. Daniel Cross, however, wasn't laughing. He went to the liaison desk near the operations tent and quietly asked why his team had been assigned someone with a ruined voice, someone who couldn't communicate in the traditional sense. A few nearby overheard phrases like, "not medically discharged," and "still fully deployable." Cross didn't sound angry. He sounded confused, like he'd been left out of the truth. Ava slid the rifle back into its case without reacting, never showing she knew they'd been looking. Later, when the team assembled again, Duke muttered something about her still being dead weight. Marcus Shaw turned just enough to stop him. Not loud, not threatening, just words that landed. "You don't come back after losing your voice unless you were exceptional before it happened." Duke scoffed, irritated that someone defended her, but he stayed quiet afterward. With each passing day, more eyes tracked her movements. Men followed the direction of her binoculars, unconsciously copying her pauses. They studied how she scanned the landscape and immediately recorded changes after a skirmish. No one admitted curiosity out loud, but the silence around her shifted. It wasn't exclusion anymore. It was awareness. Duke still cracked jokes now and then, though even he didn't seem convinced by them. Pierce never laughed. Cross stopped brushing her off like she wasn't there. And Shaw? He just kept watching her closely, as if waiting for something to reveal itself. A strange tension settled over the base. People didn't speak openly about her, but questions flickered behind every glance. Where had she served before? How many missions had she silently shaped? Why come back after a blast nearly ended her life? What soldier returns when their voice is gone? No one had answers. Not yet. Ava kept working. She cleaned equipment, memorized routes, adjusted optics that weren't even assigned to her, just to ensure they were right. She sketched slopes in pencil like she was mapping the Earth's pull. She spoke no words. She didn't need to. The men around her started hearing something else. Questions building like quiet static beneath the routine. Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes silence carries what words can't. Mission 3 began under a much heavier sky. Low clouds slid across the spine of Saddle Ridge, turning the horizon a smudged gray. The air felt weighted, as if the rocks themselves knew what waited ahead. Trucks rumbled in only close enough to unload them before rolling away in a cloud of diesel fumes and dust. Intel from the night before was sharp. Enemy fighters were moving supplies through the gullies, rehearsing along narrow choke points. It wasn't random patrols anymore. It was preparation. Cross studied the map with a stiff jaw, assuring command that his platoon would cut the route and gather hard intel. Ava listened without a sound, eyes fixed on the shaded elevation lines. She understood this kind of ground instinctively. You didn't need to see every hidden device to know where they could be buried. A landscape only offered so many places for a trap to live. Her finger hovered over the tightest pass, then withdrew. Her purpose wasn't to debate the plan. It was to watch from above. They stepped out just before sunrise, when the world isn't quite night anymore, but not yet day. Edges blurred, shadows soft. Cross led the first element into the approach, Duke pacing at the front with his usual restless swagger. Shaw and Pierce followed with the second group, leaving just enough space for maneuver if anything went wrong. Ava broke away early, climbing toward the higher ground with sure footing, her boots finding balance where others would have slipped. She moved until she reached a pocket of cover, a shallow dip of rock with a view that stretched across the entire choke point and along the ridge in both directions. She settled her rifle into place, scope steady, watching her team shrink into vulnerable dots weaving through stone that could hide death. The first warning wasn't sound, it was stillness. A bird that should have flitted away suddenly froze. A line of dust that wind should have scattered stayed suspended. Soil around a cluster of rocks looked too recently disturbed. Ava adjusted her magnification. She spotted tiny unnatural edges in the dirt near the route the lead men were taking. She fired. The bullet sliced clean through the rope of a radio pack on a man's shoulder. It swung away, yanking him sideways and dragging the man behind him off the exact line they were following. Duke twisted around, cursing up the slope and shouting that she had just shot their gear. Cross jerked his head up, anger ready to explode. Before he could speak, dust exploded where the pack struck the rock shelf. A faint metallic click followed. A hidden device brushed and activated, but not properly triggered. Had it been a boot instead, that click would have become fire. The pack had hit the very edge of a buried pressure plate. Pierce saw the dust cloud bloom and felt fear grip his chest. That was no lucky break. Ava did not miss. She had just traded a radio pack for a life. Cross forced down his frustration, waving the team wider. "Keep sharp," he growled, trying to sound like the adjustment had been his idea. Boots shifted, strides shorter now, every soldier suddenly aware of the ground beneath them. Ava exhaled quietly and widened her scope view. The path narrowed again ahead, bending around a rock that pushed them toward one, exposed side. She spotted loose stones piled too neatly, a clue of human hands. She shot again, this time high left, smacking a flat surface. Stones tumbled from the ledge and clattered down the path. Everyone froze. The rocks bounced and disappeared into a shallow dip, and when one hit a buried charge, a muted thump spit dust upward. Not enough pressure to detonate fully, but enough to expose the lethal intent beneath. Duke went silent, heart hammering. No jokes this time. Pierce stared up the ridge where she lay hidden, mind finally grasping the truth behind every shot. She wasn't warning them randomly. She was mapping the ground. Their pace slowed. At the next crossing, a slanted strip of shale slid down toward a dry wash. A single misstep would send someone skating right across whatever was planted below. Ava couldn't yell. She didn't need to. She fired at a flat rock just right of the safe line. The impact shattered it, fragments arcing through the air and raining down in a controlled streak of dust, marking a razor-thin safe corridor. Anyone paying attention could see exactly where to step. Pierce's breath tightened. "She's showing us the route," he said. Duke blinked, confused. "What?" "The dust, the patterns," Pierce insisted. "That shot wasn't random. She's drawing the path." Shaw looked from the shattered rock to Ava's position high above, understanding settling deep. "We follow where she cuts the air, not the map," Marcus Shaw said under his breath. He raised his hand, signaling a slight shift, guiding the platoon into the narrow path of dust she'd carved. Daniel Cross hesitated, torn between his ego and the undeniable fact that every one of her shots had prevented someone from walking straight into death. Pride wrestled responsibility. It only lasted a moment, but it was real. 5 meters right," he finally ordered, voice coated in authority as if the adjustment had been his idea all along. The team drifted with the dust trail. Nothing detonated. No wires snapped. No explosions barked to life beneath them. The corridor she had drawn with rock chips and ricochets was clean. Step by careful step, she kept firing short, controlled, intentional rounds. A shot to break a ridge of suspicious rock. Another to flip a piece of metal into the open. One more to vibrate a tripwire visible only through her scope. She didn't need to neutralize every threat, just reveal a safe route. Each bullet became a word. Each burst of falling debris, a sentence. Soon the men learned to read them. They flinched less. They read the ground more. When a round smacked close, but not too close, they paused, watched the dust, and moved the way it flew. A conversation had formed, one silent sniper and an entire platoon finally listening with their eyes. That narrow path was a death trap designed with overlapping triggers so that if one charge caught its target, another would take out the rescuers. Someone had engineered the kill zone carefully. Ava Sterling was dismantling it without touching a single wire. Cross's resistance faded, though his face stayed stiff. His hand signals shifted to match her cues. He never admitted it was because of her, but his boots told the truth. The mockery didn't disappear. It just lost power. Ryan Duke didn't suddenly apologize or become her champion, but his jokes fell apart halfway, replaced by uneasy glances up the ridge each time she fired. The laughter from earlier missions never returned. Instead, a new question lodged in every mind. What if she hadn't been there? What if she had chosen not to fire? By the time they reached wider terrain where traps thinned out, everyone exhaled differently, some with relief, some with quiet denial of how close they had come to dying in pieces. Ava stayed prone above them until the final element stepped clear of danger. The miracle that happened wasn't loud or cinematic. No last-second leaps, no explosions at their heels. It was quieter, almost invisible. It was the absence of tragedy, pure math and elevation, a scarred throat, a steady hand, and a language spelled in dust trails across stone. Then contact struck, fast. Shots cracked near a western drop where shale pitched into a ravine. One squad edged up for a better angle, and the enemy pounced like they'd been waiting for that mistake. Bullets hammered rock, slicing air inches from helmets. Duke was hit first, a round smashing into his shoulder and spinning him backward into hard stone. His scream cut down the line, sharp and panicked, stealing the breath from every chest. Cross called for a push forward, but the formation was wrong. Angles bad. They'd trained on the route Ava drew, not this one. They were pinned in seconds. Duke bled heavily, teeth clenched as he tried to pull himself behind a useless slab of rock. Pierce crawled to him, pressing a bandage, throwing his body between Duke and the gunfire. Shaw shouted new firing positions, but every direction held an enemy scope. Command radioed in. Medevac required. Coordinates needed. Safe landing zone essential. Cross relayed the grid twice, voice fraying at the edges. Ava stayed on overwatch, searching for movement she could shut down in a heartbeat. Then the deep thump of rotor blades rolled through the valley, dust swirling along the shale. Instead of circling wide, the helicopter dropped straight into the wash. A risky move, protocol tossed aside. The door slid open before the blades fully settled, and Colonel Hayes stepped out. He didn't stop at Cross. He didn't demand a briefing. He didn't ask what went wrong. He walked straight past the chaos, toward Ava's ridge. He didn't pause for reports. He walked straight through the chaos, past the shooters still engaging, past Ryan Duke bleeding on the ground, past Evan Pierce working frantically to keep him conscious. His boots only slowed once he reached Ava Sterling at the rocky ledge. He didn't stare at the scar on her throat or the weapon balanced beside her. His eyes found hers. Ghost echo, actual, Colonel Hayes said. Everything seemed to stop. Noise vanished. Even the gunfire below felt smothered beneath the weight of that call sign. Shaw froze mid-reload. Pierce's blood-covered hands hovered in place. Cross stepped back without realizing he did, only an inch, but it was enough. Hayes turned to the rest of the platoon. "She saved 42 lives the night she lost her voice," he said, "and you're alive tonight because of her system." Duke blinked hard, pain and realization hitting him together. But no cheers followed, no dramatic reactions. The truth didn't need volume. It moved through them like dust through rotor wash, slow, undeniable. The ridge, the blood, the shattered rock, everything held still beneath the weight of it. Weapons lowered themselves without orders being spoken. Shoulders eased. Someone finally remembered how to breathe. Ava gave one small nod, not claiming credit, not seeking praise, just acknowledging the moment existed. Respect didn't boom. It landed, quiet, final. Rotor wash scattered loose stone into the ravine as the helicopter hovered above, blades whipping moonlight into broken silver lines over the ridge. The mountains seemed to freeze with them, silence replacing the echo of gunfire. A safety clicked back on. An exhale slipped free. Still, no commands, none needed. Marcus Shaw moved first. He didn't ask if he should. He just stepped in front of her and saluted. The gesture spoke for him, and for everything he'd witnessed. Evan Pierce followed, hands still stained with Duke's blood. His salute shook slightly, not from doubt, but because adrenaline refused to settle. Then Daniel Cross hesitated, pride splintering quietly. Pride doesn't shatter loudly, it breaks in thin cracks you hope no one sees. He looked at Ava, at the dirt, at Duke struggling beneath the wrap, then swallowed hard and stepped closer. He didn't raise his hand right away. He stood there, breathing unevenly, accepting what he had refused to believe. Finally, he whispered, rough, unpolished, "I was wrong. You still protected us." Ava didn't straighten with triumph. She didn't nod as if accepting an apology. She simply regarded him for one calm second, then turned toward Duke. Her motions were precise and purposeful as she reinforced the bandage, guiding Duke's own hand into place so pressure would hold when she stepped away. She didn't comfort him. She ensured he survived. Shaw watched her, recognition deepening instead of fading. Around them, the team shifted closer, some kneeling, some lowering rifles, others just standing in a humbled circle. No applause, no loud praise. Respect, true respect, arrived without noise. Moonlight spilled across the ridge, catching the edge of her scarf as it fluttered in the rotor wind. A glimpse of her scar flashed, just enough to remind them what it had cost her to stay in the fight. No one said sorry. There was no need for words anymore. Instead of crowding around her, the men instinctively stepped aside, opening a small path where moments before they had stood shoulder to shoulder. Evan Pierce picked up her notebook from the ground, gently brushing dust off the cover before handing it back. He said nothing, just placed it into her hand with a cautious nod, as if recognizing both the weight of that book and the stories inside that nobody should ask about. Marcus Shaw signaled the helicopter crew overhead, then looked back at Ava, not surprised anymore, just respectfully acknowledging her as an equal. Daniel Cross approached again, but there was no command in his voice this time. No barked order. He simply asked, quiet, almost unsure, if she wanted help getting Duke down the ridge. Ava shook her head once and moved beside the wounded man, supporting his weight with practiced steadiness while Pierce managed the medical needs. The rest of the platoon followed her line down the slope. No commands, no radio calls, just trust. She wasn't leading them. They walked the route she saw long before they ever understood it existed. The narrator's truth settled like dust around them. A silent sniper had spoken louder than anyone else on that ridge. The post-operation tent smelled of antiseptic and sun-warmed canvas. Ryan Duke lay on a cot at the back, shoulder bandaged tight, a monitor beeping calmly beside him. The team drifted in and out, turning in gear, signing paperwork, waiting to hear what came next. Pierce approached Ava as she brushed carbon from her rifle bolt. He didn't try to force conversation. silence was her language. Instead, he briefly touched his own shoulder, mirroring the pressure bandage she had reinforced on Duke, and whispered a simple, "Thank you." No ceremony, no apology, just truth finally spoken. Shaw came next, holding the notebook she'd left behind, its cover dusty from the field. He opened to a page filled with firing arcs and impact estimates, calculations that had nearly become casualty numbers. He handed her a pen without a word. Ava noted a set of ranges and elevations, then gave the notebook back. Shaw's eyes dropped slightly, not in shame, but in recognition. It was more than a signature, it was memory recorded. Cross arrived later, holding paperwork. His voice carried none of the sharp authority he usually wielded. He told her he had submitted a formal commendation request, one tied directly to the lives she had protected. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't surrender, it was responsibility. Ava nodded once, calm, minimal, then continued wiping carbon from the rifle. She didn't want medals, she didn't care about praise. To her, survival was a requirement, not a decoration. The platoon moved quietly as they left. The jokes that once targeted her never resurfaced. No one mimicked her silence anymore. They simply spoke less, filling the air with a new quiet that replaced the old noise. Outside, dust whispered along the walls of Fort Ridgefield. Inside, the story closed the way real courage often does, without applause, without speeches. Not with celebration, but with lives still breathing. No exaggeration needed. Heroes don't always shout. Some protect with discipline, not volume. Some save others without ever asking to be seen. And when the truth finally rises, it does so without ceremony. Courage isn't always a voice. Sometimes it's a single round fired at the exact right moment. They never mocked silence again. Whenever a briefing room fills with loud confidence and careless certainty, someone glances at the empty seat where a sniper once sat, the one who didn't need words to save them. They remember the dust paths she carved with bullets, the warnings drawn without sound, and the night a medic lived because she fired where danger hid. Long after deployment ended, when new soldiers arrived and old stories resurfaced, her name traveled quietly through conversations. Not shouted, simply remembered. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe to Major Tom's Tales for more real stories of service and courage. Stories that ensure bravery is never forgotten,